I'm going to take you through a little bit about the findings and some of the explanations for it, but just a little bit first about the studies themselves. So we've done now, it's been a big series of studies. We've done over 100,000 interviews in up to 40 countries, and the concept is incredibly simple, where we ask people to guess the reality for their country and then compare that with the actual reality and see what the difference is. That's all it really amounts to. And it's not about multiple choice questions like you got in the quiz, if you did that. It's actually guessing the number, which is important. And we've looked at all sorts of things, from immigration to vaccine safety to obesity levels, murder rates, happiness and sex, as Margaret has said. And I'll cover as many of those as I can now, but there's much more in the book. And I can say this now that I'm leaving without seeming to suck up to my boss. But it does reflect Ipsos's, we've done this ourselves. No one's paid for this. It reflects Ipsos's real commitment to understanding society. This is just out there for people to use and reuse, and hopefully it helps. And the key point is that we are, as we've heard, incredibly wrong on lots and lots of different aspects. But that immediately raises the question of why, and that immediately raises the questions of what can we do about it. And I'll try to cover bits about that. The first thing to say is this is not particularly a new crisis. We focus a lot right now on alternative facts, post-truth, fake news, those types of things. But as far as we can tell, going back as early as we can with these types of questions to the 1940s in America, which was a political ignorance trend of research, as far as we can tell, comparing now with them, we're just as wrong and dumb now as we were back then. There isn't anything particularly different on lots of these things. People were just as wrong. That, combined with the fact that people are wrong in very different issues, in very different countries, suggests that it's a wide range of causes that explain this. And I group it in the book into two groups: how we think and what we're told. And what we're told includes things like our own experience, what we see and hear when we're out and about, and then a whole group of things around the media, social media and social technology, and politics. But it's not just about that external stimulus that we've got for it. It is how we think as individuals. And there's a concept called rational ignorance, which I won't talk about a lot, but it basically says that it's not rational to spend lots of time finding out about these things. We should just get on with our lives. But I'll focus more on our biases and heuristics, the shortcuts that we take that can sometimes lead us astray. I won't talk about psychophysics, but I'd love to talk about psychophysics if we get a chance at the end. So if we can get into that later, we will. And then we have to start with our maths and statistical literacy abilities, because it's still the case that 10% of people don't understand percentages, and we're much, much worse on probability levels. I won't test the audience here. I'll just show instead this one question from a different study that we did for the RSS, where we asked people what would make them most proud of their kids, whether they were good at reading and writing or whether they were good at numbers. And what we found was that 55% of people said they'd be proud of them good at reading and writing, and only 13% said they would be proud of them if good at numbers, which was a depressing finding for me as a numbers person. I think depressing for the RSS as a numbers organisation, but reflects the focus that we put on mathematical understanding. My favourites, though, were these people who... this very harsh tiger parenting that people have. I'm proud of nothing. Move on. But there's much more to our errors than those kind of numerical limitations. One of the key concepts in the book in explaining this is something called emotional innumeracy, which you can see in so many of the findings. This is one of the key ones from the book, are huge overestimations of teenage births. So we asked people what percentage of women and girls aged 15 to 19 it was over 30 countries, do you think give birth each year? And the actuals, it's quite a rare event, so it's 2% overall across those countries, a bit higher in Argentina, but single-digit figures. But that's not the guess. 23%, that 1 in 4 teenage girls are giving birth each year. So in a class of 30, an all-girl class of 30, that's 7 baby showers every year within that class. That's the guess, and it gives this massive gap between the reality and the perception. Even bigger in Argentina, where they got 4 in 10 nearly teenage girls giving birth each year. This is actually one of the questions in the quiz that we asked you, actually. And 200 of you did it. Over 200 of you did the quiz, which is great response rate for researchers and people interested. They usually never take quizzes or do things for us. So how many of you got that right? It was actually very high, which I know I should be proud of my intelligent audience, but actually that annoys me, and for some reason, that you're not wrong. This is not how Hans Rosling does it. You're always wrong. So 87%, you got that one very, very right. But why are people so wrong about those? It's a lot to do with the vivid emotional stories that we remember. We're storytelling animals, so we remember those stories and very vivid images of pregnant girls in uniform or holding newborn babies. They're the things that we remember and draw our attention. And it's partly about how the media discuss it, because I'll guarantee you will never see a headline like this in the media. The media is drawn to unusual stories because we're drawn to unusual stories, and we like unusual stories. So the norm doesn't get reported very much. And that's really part of the explanations behind this idea of emotional innumeracy, which is we overestimate what we worry about as much as worrying about what we overestimate. That's the key concept here, is that cause and effect on this run in both directions. When you give a big figure for immigration, it's partly because you're worried about it, not only because of your view of the reality. That has a very useful side effect, I think, for misperceptions, is it makes misperceptions a useful indicator of what we're really worried about. It's quite an automatic response, so it gives you an idea of what your real concerns are. But it also has vital implications for us as communicators, policymakers, that you can't just use facts, because it misdiagnoses part of the cause. Part of our cause for our misperceptions is emotional. So myth-busting, just firing facts at people, is seldom going to be the full answer. It doesn't mean facts are useless, as we'll come back to, but it means it's seldom going to be the full answer. There's another effect in this one in particular where we're useless as humans at spotting slow positive changes. So on teenage pregnancy, this is from the US, similar trends in other countries. Trends in birth rates per 1,000 females, it's more or less halved over this kind of period across all different types of ethnic group in this case. So it's kind of this slow incremental improvement is not what we focus on as humans. And that is a lot of the Rosling work and a lot of Max Roser's work and others, is we do not see those small gradual improvements. What we do instead is we tend to focus on negative information. We tend to be drawn to negative information much more. And this has been shown in loads of experiments, great experiments by John Cacioppo, late great now John Cacioppo at Chicago University. We run a whole series of experiments showing people positive images, like pizzas and Ferraris. I didn't know how they decided pizzas and Ferraris were positive images, but pizzas and Ferraris are positive images. And then putting people in MRI machines and testing how their brain reacts, where it reacts and with what intensity. And it reacts with more intensity to negative images, things like mutilated faces or dead cats, than positive. See, look, let me explain. Hold on, let me explain. That is not a dead cat. That is a resting cat. I looked at lots and lots of images of dead cats, and they were too gruesome to show, so we found one of a resting cat for exactly that reaction, because we react more positively. That worked much better than I expected. So we react more strongly to those negative images. So I was prepared for this. Don't remember the dead cat. I don't want to be the dead cat guy. That cat was just resting. But there is a sort of evolutionary reason for this, which this focus on negative information, is it was, in cave people days, negative information often more urgent and had to be acted on. So we literally store it in different places in our brain more accessibly. So if there was a lurking saber-toothed tiger, someone told you about it, you need to act on that. And the people that didn't act on that were edited out of the gene pool. So we are quite focused on negative information. That's related to lots of other effects, where we feel losses much more than we feel gains. So that sense of losing money, losing friends, or we feel much more than gaining money or gaining friends. So those types of things are related. That is a human characteristic. And it has an interesting side effect, again, from a more personal relationship point of view. It means that because we feel the negative more, the correct balance of relationships in your personal relationships is not one negative experience and one positive experience. It's 5 positive experiences to every negative experience to have a good personal relationship. So we should have more date nights with our partners if you're not having date nights. Maybe not as cheesy looking as this one, but increase the positive interactions you have with people to outweigh our focus on the negative. So when we see things from academic research in both the UK and the US that shows that 80 to 90% of media coverage of Muslims is negative, it's really easy to find headlines like this, that this is a Muslim plot to kill the Pope. It's not an extremist plot. This is a Muslim plot to kill the Pope. Some dodgy reporting of surveys, misinterpretation of some aspects of surveys, and then you actually get presidents saying, I think Islam hates us, Islam as a whole hates us, and then some dodgy magazine covers. You can see how that's going to affect people's perceptions, and it's not even just news media. This tweet the other day, actually, from Lexi Alexander, saying, can you do one show without a bad Muslim in it, just one? Collateral, McMafia, now Bodyguard, all these storylines that have had negative portrayals of Muslims included within them. So it's no surprise then, really, that we have a massive overestimation of the Muslim population. So we asked, out of every 100 people, about how many do you think are Muslim across different countries? 8%, only 1% in the US, 5% in Britain, but the guesses are huge again. So French thinking that 3 in 10 of their population are Muslim, US thinking it's 17%, these massive gaps. Us in Britain, 3 times the actual level. We guess 3 times the actual level. We also asked people to project into the future on this, actually, and see what it would be in 2 or 3 years' time. And France went up to 4 in 10, thinking that there was not just a present picture, but it's a sense that it's growing so fast, that 4 in 10, which is the equivalent of every adult French male being Muslim in 2 or 3 years' time. So incredible misperception. So how many of you got that right? What do you think, better or worse than the last one? Better. Better. There you go. It's actually annoyingly the same. Same level of high accuracy. What a great audience. Ruining the whole concept. But there is a key implication from this, which is, as Margaret said, things are mostly not as bad as we think, and it's good to keep that in mind. It is a natural tendency to think it's worse than it is. Not only do we have a too negative view of the static picture, we also think things are getting worse, again, due to a real psychological effect called rosy retrospection. And you can see that in things like our perceptions of the murder rate and how that's changing. So the murder rate, we asked this in 30 countries, collected the data for 30 countries, the actual data, and the murder rate is down in 25 out of the 30 countries, by 29% on average across that whole group. So not a small decline, a big decline since 2000. Down in South Africa, down in the US. But that is not the perception that people have about the murder rate. Only 15% of people across this whole sample think the murder rate is down. Nearly half think it's up. And then in South Africa, over 80% of people think the murder rate has gone up since 2000. US is quite similar to the average. And we asked this is the final thing, I think, question that we asked you. How did people do on this one? Better or worse? Same. Worse, yes. At last, you got something wrong. So only half of you got that correct. And you can see why, potentially, because we have had stories recently about year-on-year increases in crime. And that is true, but actually the long-term trend, back to 2000, is still significantly down. And you can see how that works. And again, it's because the media focuses on sudden increases, even if it's the longer-term trend is down. And so do politicians. If it bleeds, it leads. Cliche is a cliche for a reason, because it is true. Donald Trump, who features heavily in the book, was throughout the campaign trail saying this: the murder rate in our country is the highest it's been in 47 years. You won't hear the press saying that. You wouldn't hear the press saying that because it's not true, in any way true. What was true was that the murder rate had increased, its year-on-year increase was the highest it had been for 40 years, so you'd seen a big uptick in it. But the actual murder rate was still half the level of 40 years ago. So there were big decreases in this, but a significant but a just recent change has affected that. And then it gets really powerful when people try to combine these different fears. So this was the famous tweet from Donald about the United Kingdom crime rate rises 13% annually amid spread of radical Islamic terror. Not good. We must keep America safe. And this led to my favourite ever Fraser Nelson tweet, which amid is a word loved by fake news websites to inflate correlation and causation. UK crime is also up amid the spread of fidget spinners, which is very true. But there is an effect here where we literally edit out the bad from our past. So this is work by Terence Mitchell, Washington University. Lots of experiments that follow people, track people through, in a more prosaic issue here, tracking them before, during, and after their holidays. And people go through the same sort of pattern, and we recognise this in ourselves maybe. It's from an excited anticipation before you go. Then you get the reality of minor niggles when you're actually on holiday. And then you get the mild disappointment when you're back. Not just about being back, but about the holiday itself. And everyone followed this kind of route. But then the interesting bit was that the memory grows fonder the longer away we get of those holidays. So we literally edit out the kids being sick in the car, and we just remember the sunsets and the walks on the beach. So this is a real effect that people have. So that's all in terms of data from it. There are many more examples and effects in the book. As Margaret said, the ones on sex are quite astounding, and it's particularly astounding because it's the men's guess for how often young women have sex each month is 23%, 23 times a month, 23 times every month, which is works out every weekday and twice on a special day. It's kind of it's incredible. The reality is 5. The key points here, though, are that women don't guess that far wrong for women, and men don't guess that far wrong for men. It's only men guessing for women that is so wrong. And that, to me, the more I thought about this, the more disturbing that becomes. Because it's only 2 explanations. It's what we're told, it's the images that we get set, or it's how men think about this. And it's only that how we think or what we're told aspects of it. And neither of the conclusions from that are very good for our image of men. We also talk about obesity. Misperception of obesity, Margaret's touched on that, but there's also an interesting one about sugar, which is that we think overeating of sugar is other people's problem, not ours, that we don't overeat sugar, but it's a real big issue generally, which is an issue because social norms are so powerful in affecting our own behaviour. There's some terrible misperceptions that will affect our actual lives. We think we only need £100,000 in our pension pot in order to get 24 grand a year when we retire. That's the average guess, and it doesn't get better until you're actually in retirement, the accuracy of your guess, which is obviously way too late. So that has a real impact on people. The vaccinations one is just terrible, that this is still not dying off as a myth. So 6 in 10 people around the country, around all the countries that we asked this, the overall average was 6 in 10 people either think it's positively true that vaccines are linked to autism in kids, or they are unsure whether it's true or not, which is awful as a perception that still holds on based on no scientific evidence and being debunked so many times. But it's still that doubt, and we can see the effects of that from falling vaccination rates in some countries and particular geographical areas. And then finally, obviously, there's going to be a big section on Trump and Brexit, as Margaret hinted at, lots about that. And just one figure from that is that the foreign direct investment that comes into the UK, 50% of that comes from European Union countries. But at the time of the referendum, the average guess was 30%, and the average guess among leavers was 25%, so half the actual level. So our misperceptions of how much we were economically reliant on European Union was real in people's concerns. So we did a Misperceptions Index about which is the worst country and the best country on this, which you might have seen, and Ben's sort of given it away with his early focus on Italy, because the worst at this all around the world is Italy. Italy are by far the most wrong. And when we told our Italian team that, they were strangely proud of it as an issue. They accepted the award with glee, really. It was nice. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got Sweden and Germany. And we're kind of in the middle in a big group of countries that are more or less the same. So you've got Italy, US at one end, Germany and Sweden at the other end. I'm mostly showing you this to show you where you came in the quiz, just so that you can congratulate yourself or not. So we should congratulate, there's 18% of you who did the quiz who are equivalent to Sweden. Well done you. 1 in 5 of you got, I think it's 8 and 10 or more. The vast bulk of you actually in the middle, 70%. So that leaves 13% of you who are Italy, unfortunately. But there was lots of things that lots of people got wrong. So and the main theme was, we're much fatter and happier than you think. That is the main theme. Only 20%, less than 20% of you got the obesity level right, 62%, or thought that 9 in 10 people were broadly happy with their lives. So we are very wrong on those two perceptions, even in this very learned room. Final couple of points. As I say, there's no sign that we're any worse than in the past. But that shouldn't make us complacent. The online environment that we have now threatens our view of reality at a new scale, a scale we haven't really had before. And this does include things like the Russian Minister of Defense saying that information is another type of armed forces. That is an important aspect of that, but it's far, far from the full picture. It's much broader than information disorder or fake news. And really, it's the twin effects of our own filtering, our own choosing of who to follow, who to friend, and then unseen algorithms doing it for us, picking and choosing based on what we've already liked before. Because more time on the platforms means more cash. There's a direct relationship of revenue on these relationships. And we know from everything that we've done on cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias over the years that people love to see what they already think, and they will move away from things that challenge their view. So it's kind of built into the system. It is true that surveillance is the business model of the internet, of apparently free internet, but that means that confirmation bias, giving us what we already want to see, is its currency. That's effectively what it trades in. So that's the real challenge from this. So, is there anything we can do? It doesn't look very hopeful when you get Daniel Kahneman, the man who knows more about this than anyone, saying, I've been studying this stuff for about 45 years, really haven't improved one bit. It's not quite as hopeless as that, because what he's talking about is you can't really train your system one thinking. You can't stop your emotional reactions or immediate responses on these things. But you can potentially train yourself to kick in your system two, or more considered thinking. So you have to start with the assumption. We've got some tips and suggestions in the book. You start with the assumption that things are getting better. That's a better place to start. You've got to avoid assuming that you're utterly normal, which a lot of us do. So in India, we did this survey online. So in India, the online Indians thought that 64% of India had access to the internet, when it was only actually 20% of Indians at the time of the survey that had access to the internet. And that's really important. We do tend to think us and our friends are normal, and the rest of the country reflects this, but it's not always true. And then we've got to avoid focusing on the extreme as well. We're drawn to these extreme stories, and that's helped by actively unfiltering our worlds. And there's lots of tools and ways that you can unfilter your world. And final slide. We can support a reality-based view of the world through more policy and other types of interventions. And critical statistical and news literacy from school onwards is such a key aspect of this. Really hard to do, but the technology and the way we get our information has evolved at such a quicker rate than what we teach our kids in terms of how to deal with this. And we're not really keeping pace with that change. We need to train in these new skills much earlier. And there are some hopeful moves in that, in the sense of Italy is piloting that type of core curriculum approach in 8,000 schools, and we should be doing more of that ourselves. We've got to support fact-checking, not just in terms of after the fact, but systemically, just trying to get in there first, preemptively. And some of the platforms are doing good work on that with some of the fact-checkers directly, but we need to do more of that. Us as campaigners and communicators in the room, we've got to remember that facts and stories are not opposites. We've maybe in the past focused too much on facts, and then we've moved very much to just focus on emotions and stories. But we can actually, and should be, and can be using both to explain change. And then finally, I think there is huge untapped potential in more meaningful deliberation. We've done a lot of that at Ipsos MORI over the years, and people do engage in complex issues, contentious issues. You can provide evidence. People don't change their entire worldview, but they will listen and they will shift. We've got to be more optimistic about that, including using technological approaches as well as traditional approaches to get people to engage. So finally, that is that hopeful note, not just that the world is getting better, but also that we're not automatons in this. We're not entirely driven by our biases and tribal identities. We don't think that of ourselves. We just released a survey today that shows that we don't think of that of ourselves, and it's not true of other people. So finally, for me, that is the main misperception we've got to challenge. We can change this, and we should be hopeful. Thank you.